Alton Carter is a game changer. He grew up in an abusive family, and by the time of age 8, he found himself taken away from his family with his brothers and sisters and placed into foster care. As a youth, he admits to being a handful and blamed the world for his problems. After getting placed with his uncle, he then found himself alone and again abused. Alton spent many nights on the street and ended up waking up one day and deciding he was not going to let his past define him. He went to college, got a degree, became a cop. He is now the youth director at First United Methodist Church in Stillwater and has dedicated his life to helping create change and hope in the lives of youth. He has written 2 books, The Boy Who Carried Bricks and its somewhat sequel, Aging Out. These books have won and been nominated for various awards and recognition. Both books tell the story, the grief, the pain of what some children experience growing up in an abusive home and in and out of foster care. These books are also full of hope, inspiration, and determination. We at Fostering Connections are so honored to welcome him to our first of many YouTube events. So, Alton, welcome and thank you for being with us today.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
Thank you, Alton. Again, I'd like to start out with a question. I'd first like to ask if you could give us a brief telling of your life growing up for our viewers who are not familiar with your work.
So, my mom had 5 kids. All of us had different dads, and we kind of struggled to make ends meet. Oldest brother he started getting in trouble with the law probably 8, 9 years old, out breaking curfew, and him and a few of his friends, breaking in and stealing things from people. So the police started coming to our house regularly. On top of all that, my mom just managed to find sometimes just not the greatest men. So all 5 of us have different dads. None of our dads ever cared to stick around. And so the men that she did have beat my mom. They mistreated her. We saw every sort of abuse you could ever imagine, from, just people treating my mom horribly. And I can remember watching my mom kind of blame herself, for the way things were going on. And I partially, I think my mom put up with that stuff because she thought it was important for us to have a dad. So she always kept trying to find people that, even if they were horrible. And, I'll always tell people, right now, if I could go back as a 6, 7, or 8-year-old kid, I would tell my mom that, hey, we don't care. We don't need a dad. We just need you to put us first. And so I think my mom sacrificed a lot of herself and then things for us, trying to keep a man there. And so we got evicted from housing, apartments. My goodness, we'd stay 3 or 4 months and then we'd get kicked out because mom wouldn't pay the bills. And, she didn't know how to manage money. And so that was a big issue, watching her get her welfare check. And then she'd order Kentucky Fried Chicken, or would order some food for 4 days, and then the money was gone. And so we struggled. We ate out of spinach cans. We had roaches everywhere. And my first book, I talk about having to go to the doctor to get roaches taken out of my ears. And so I grew up watching. By the time I was 8, abuse was no longer shocking. Watching a man punch a woman in the face was like every day. There was no emotional reaction to that. So then we got taken from my mom at 8 and placed with my grandparents, where there was a house full of people, drugs, alcohol. My grandmother would tell you she did the best she could, but she had 3 sons living with us. And so they were not the greatest examples of how people should be. So I watched one of my uncles beat women. The other 2 were severe alcoholics. And grandfather was like this incredible man that did the best he could to take care of like this dysfunctional family. And so I got taken away from my grandparents, or I ran away from my grandparents after my uncle threw me down some stairs and broke my ribs. Got sent to the Payne County Youth Shelter, went to Lloyd Raider, ended up at the Boys Ranch in Perkins, Oklahoma, the only Black kid in an all-white school. And I'd always felt different my whole childhood. And so, but it was just another example of what it's like kind of to not fit in. We had an extremely abusive ranch dad mentally that just confused me, not only about faith, but about a lot of, you know, the responsibility of a father and a husband. He should have taught us all those things, and it was backwards. I mean, it was nothing like it should. One of the things that bothered me most were, like, in terms of faith, like I heard people call God Father, but that was weird to me. And then I heard people say, well, God will never let anything bad happen to you. And so by the time I was about 12 years old, this was my version of the creation story. So God created everything, the heavens and earth, and on the seventh day he rested. And so I felt like I was created on the sixth day, and on the seventh day God rested, and he forgot all about me. He forgot completely about me, that I was on this island all by myself, because people said that God will never let anything bad happen to you. And so I couldn't explain why all this stuff was happening to me. And so I got a little bit confused. And then they made us call our ranch, they made us call him Dad. And so that was tough. And so I stayed there. They ended up firing our ranch dad for child abuse, for making us carry bricks and all sort of other punishment. Went back to the Payne County Youth Shelter, where I ran away from the Boys Ranch, and then they put me back with my ranch dad, who had been fired for child abuse, at the Boys Ranch. And so stayed there about 6 months till I couldn't take the abuse no more, and then left. Went to Boley, Oklahoma, and then I ended up in Cushing, Oklahoma, and where my foster parents had a dog that was the N-word. The dog, they literally had a pet dog that the dog was the N-word. And so when I got introduced,
That was the dog's name?
yeah, oh yeah. So
Oh my God.
we were sitting down in the living room, like my first interaction meeting this family. And so we're talking, and I'm sitting down, and right next to me is my caseworker. And so we're talking, and all of a sudden this dog runs into the living room where we're sitting and, you know, getting to know everybody. And my foster mom leans down and says, hello, and called the dog the N-word. That was the dog's name, because it was a black, like, mangy looking dog. And so, but it was like, this was like normal. And as horrible as that seems, I mean, I can honestly say it taught me one of the greatest lessons in the entire world. So I called my grandfather, and I told my grandfather, I'm like, man, you got to come get me. I'm not staying here. And so my grandfather told me that he was born in 1913. He said that when he was 10, he joined a baseball team that was all white, and they would travel out of town to play baseball. He said when they stopped at a restaurant to eat, all the white kids would file into the restaurant, but blacks weren't allowed. So at 10 years old, he would go to the back and sit down on a box and eat his lunch, if he had lunch, and then he'd get on the bus and go play a game, where he said back then it was, you know, everybody called him the N-word playing baseball. And so my grandfather told me that story and said, basically, he said, please do not let the name of a dog stop you from being the first person in the history of your family to graduate from high school. And he said that that's not a nice word, but that's not who you are. So you decide right now that you're not one, nor will you ever be. Now, had I went through that experience, had I not went through that experience, I don't think I would understand that I would self-sabotage. So every time somebody said something to me or treated me with disrespect, who knows how I might have reacted had my grandfather not told me that story. And so he just said, don't let a dog stop you from accomplishing one of your goals. And he pretty much said, so what? You got a place to stay. You're being fed. Why wouldn't you stay there? And so I ended up staying in Cushing for 3 years and graduating from high school.
Thank you, Alton. You said in your book that you always wanted to find somewhere to belong. Could you tell us more about that, and how did growing up in your life where you felt moments of belonging?
So I think I played the game. So I run into my high school friends, and all of them, their account of me, like they'll say, "Man, you seem so happy." I had one friend told me that she goes, "Why are you telling everybody you were a foster parent? I mean, you were a foster kid when you weren't." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" She goes, "You weren't a foster kid." Well, my parents were white and I was black, and so it was comical that she didn't see me that way. So that kind of taught me that, man, sometimes we can become really good at faking it. And so I wanted to fit in, and I acted like I fit in. And in most cases, probably I fit in better in a foster home than I did at my biological home. And so, like, trying to find your way, there's something, well, I use this analogy that explains like what it's like when you're a foster parent. And so, you know how we go through that honeymoon period and all of a sudden you'll see kids kind of act up. Well, here's why I think that happens. So let's say, like, I remember being in Cushing in my foster home, and so it was my sophomore, junior year. I remember walking into the living room, looking up at this photo that was on the wall. It was a family picture. So my foster parents had taken a picture of the foster kids, and we were all posted up above the fireplace. Now, that's something to celebrate on. You look at this picture and you feel like a family. So I remember looking at this one day, just happened to look at that picture, and here's what I thought. That's not my mom. That's not my dad. That's not my siblings. That's not my house. And then I went to, well, why didn't my mom want me? Why didn't my dad, care to stick around? And so it just snowballed. And that started this sort of idea of never fitting in. And so I use this weird analogy that talks about, let's say my mother was a cat and she had 5 kittens. And after 5, 6, 7 years, somebody came and said, "Hey, this is dysfunctional. The way you're being raised is wrong." And they took me away and placed me with the dog and puppies. And so the dog and puppies scenario is exactly the way life is supposed to be. And so I get over there at the very beginning, man, life is great. I mean, I'm getting to try new foods. I get to see how people should be treated. And then I wake up one day and I recognize that I'm a dog amongst cats. I don't fit in. And so it's just weird, or a cat amongst dogs. And so I don't belong. And every time you look at a family, you're different, and that's all you can focus on. And so that's the way it was probably most of my life because of that situation. I mean, up until even after I was married, I would say I still struggled trying to fit in.
Oh, there comes my kitty cat to say hi. Alton, our main focus here at Fostering Connections is to provide resources for families who are in foster care by providing them with items that they need to make the child's experience as best as it can be. Were there moments in your life growing up that you saw various foster families help you succeed? Maybe you didn't realize that at the time, but could you look back at those moments?
There were tons of things that, like a driver's license at 16, a car. I watched every one of my friends get a car, and it's like I was a foster kid, so my foster parents didn't, buy me a car for my 16th birthday. So those things, and all it did was it fed the narrative to me not fitting in. That's the way I saw it. Some of the other things I know foster kids or even myself I struggled with is like holidays, and I have not figured out how in the world you fix like Christmas time should be about family. And I hear a lot of people tell foster kids, you ought to be grateful that you have a place to stay, and then you feel guilty. I mean, even if life is great, so let's say I end up in a foster home that, man, is better than I deserve. I start feeling guilty. Like I'm thinking about my brothers and sisters who aren't getting to eat, and I'm ashamed and I feel bad. And so there's just a lot of thoughts that foster kids and kids who are adopted that they go through that they're afraid to express and talk about because they might just appear, to be ungrateful.
And Alton, I know I don't have to tell you about our current political climate or go into a much larger discussion on race, but could you share with us what it was like being a child of color growing up in a mostly transracial family? And what advice would you give to someone who's watching this about accepting and learning about other races, religions, cultures of the child in foster care who might be struggling within their family?
So, I mean, I bet in the last 2 weeks, I bet I've had 50 or 60 conversations, some with groups and some with individuals. And I have when I say a different perspective, my take on this is not like just to come out swinging. It's about how do we move forward? And honestly, I feel like this, that most of my friends who are in law enforcement, most of my friends who are white, they treat me great. And so it's hard for me to see, I mean, I'm not in those places like Chicago, but it's how we respond means everything. So when somebody is treating somebody unfairly, that's a question that I want to know. I mean, how do we teach people what is the correct way to respond? Because I don't think rioting is it. I don't think tearing up stores and vandalizing things is the answer. I mean, I get that people are frustrated. And so for me, it's how in the world can I, like if I say I'm a man of faith, isn't it important for me to demonstrate forgiveness even in the middle of somebody telling me that they hate me?
Did you feel that conviction as a child?
I felt,
Or really any time in your life as an adult, as a cop,
um,
anything like that?
well, as a kid, I didn't feel like I had the right to say anything. I mean, I honestly felt like, what can I say? And I think kids today feel like they have a voice because of what's going on, but do they really? I mean, do they really feel like that their voice changes or makes things differently? So as a kid, it was just try to fit in, and that would make you feel even more uncomfortable. So I just tried to blend in. I tried to act like what I thought white kids would act like. I tried to portray myself as someone, and part of that, you lose your identity. And when I say that, it's that I hope people look at me, and even I do remember thinking this as a kid, that I hope people see me as a person before they see me as a foster kid or even a kid that's Black. I mean, I hope they see me as a person. And so that's what I remember most.
One of my favorite words in your book is after you and Kristen meet, who's your wife now, and you were nervous about meeting her parents. You were concerned a lot about their feelings with their white daughter marrying a Black man. But then you go on to describe this beautiful relationship that you now have. You use the words, love can allow one to see. In your life now, how do those words speak to you?
Well, first, I guess like when I wrote that, love can allow someone to see, it's amazing. Like if you can't stand somebody or you're full of bias, you don't really give yourself the chance to get to know them. And so that's kind of the way I felt, and it goes both ways. You know, I had this preconceived ideas that people would just not like me. And so sometimes it's self-fulfilling prophecy that you act like that, or they're not going to like me because I'm Black, or, you know, because I'm different, or I'm a foster kid. So those issues, like once you get to know people and you learn, or you allow yourself to love someone, it's amazing. You can really get to know like who they are. And so like, how is it that we come to accept some people's faults, but not others? And I think it's because we've allowed ourselves to love that person unconditionally. And to me, that's what that means. It's to look at somebody like God would look at us and not see us as a piece of trash, a foster kid, somebody that's racist, somebody that's part of Black Lives Matter. I mean, I don't think that's the way we should see people at all first. I think we should get to know and understand who they are, what they've been through. And so like allowing myself, and I feel like my in-laws giving me a chance that they got to learn who I was. Not somebody that's perfect, somebody that had more issues than you could ever imagine. And so like allowing yourself to love people is like one of the greatest things. And also like for somebody that never really felt like somebody cared about them, like when somebody allows you, no, when somebody allows themselves to love you, it also creates an opportunity for you to love yourself.
In your days as an assistant at Stillwater Middle School, you talk about a few encounters with kids that later you found yourself relating to. Could you share more moments about these encounters and how they defined who you became today?
Um,
I don't want to put you on the spot.
well, yeah. So what's interesting is that like I would like to say yes, I would, and as a 17-year-old, I would tell you that I'm listening. The problem is all the strains or the filters or the sifters that was getting information in. I mean, like the day of the week it was, if it was around Christmas time and you told me something that was of value, I was such a mess. I didn't listen. I didn't care about anything anybody said. Emotionally, I checked out. And so I would probably go back and I would probably go back and tell myself to take notes, Because sometimes, like when you feel like somebody's giving you something, advice, write it down, even if you don't think it makes sense. So that's probably what I would say.
And later on in the part of your book of Aging Out, you talk a lot about becoming a police officer, the birth of your kids, the passing of some family members, and how those moments affected you. One common theme that I read throughout your book is that you seem to express a lot of guilt and sometimes resentment. How do you rectify that with your life now? And what advice would you give to someone in that situation?
Well, it's what I've come to understand now is what it was that caused me to feel guilty. We were created as social creatures. I believe that. And so when you're born into a family, it almost becomes sort of like this tribe where you function together. So everybody in a family setting has a role, even in a children's home, group home, everybody serves a purpose or a role. We were made to feel like we were nothing but nuisance. I mean, as kids, because of things, not necessarily in a foster home sometimes, but as a kid growing up, we were nothing but a nuisance. And so that was what I grabbed hold of as a kid, that we were constantly in the way, that we were a hungry mouth to feed, an inconvenience. We stopped mom from becoming who she was. And so I think as you grow older, you sort of attach your identity to that sort of function as a tribe. And a lot of people never come out of that. So the moment you become something, well, I had 12, 14 years of thinking that I was nobody. And now all of a sudden I'm successful. And it's like, I still wanted, like my mom, even when my mom died, I wanted her approval more than anything else. And so that was part of it. That guilt was me wanting really to fix things that there was no way I could fix them. Like I couldn't pull my mom out of the ghetto. I couldn't save my brother from becoming a drug addict. And so I think I felt guilty. And I think people have to cycle through that. And so it was tough. And I figured out, like one of the greatest things we can do is people who are trying to break sort of that cycle, is the greatest thing we could ever do for our biological family and for ourselves is succeed. It's accomplish the things that you hold to be true or that you want to accomplish to make yourself feel like you've done something. And I say that because like my oldest brother, he would tell you, I mean, there were times he couldn't stand me, but in the public, in the community, he told everybody how proud of me he was. He always said, I'm proud of my brother Alton. And so if nothing else, I gave my brother somebody to brag on. And so for me, it was about graduating from high school. It was about getting a college degree. It was about having a house that no one in my family would ever be able to own. And so I gave him something to brag about. So
at the end of your book, you talk about counseling and how big of an impact that made on your life. Could you tell us and our viewers today the importance of counseling and what that means to you?
Yeah, I mean, in society today, it seems like we don't want to send people to counseling, or you feel like you're weak. And one thing I know to be true, and I heard somebody say this, and I know there's a book, but it says hurt people hurt people. I also heard one that said you repeat what you do not repair. And I never really, I was like, oh, that's not true. You know, if I want to hide my issues, I can hide them from the people I care about. And a lot of times that's not true. I mean, a lot of times your kids and family will inherit characteristics and bad habits that you had because they watched you do it. And so for me, counseling was like, it really was about me becoming better. It was even more important that I sort of rectify or figure some things out so I didn't pollute my kids. I mean, I wanted nothing else. Like I wanted a relationship with my kids. And I mean, I get to look at people today, and it doesn't matter, all walks of life, and their kids don't go back and talk or spend time with them. And man, that's the last thing in the world that I wanted. And so, yeah, my kids have a voice to share. Counseling to me it was a necessity and very important. And I was honest. You know, I talk about that in the book as puking everything out. So recommend it.
All right, Alton, last question. In the end, you say, I have waited more than 40 years to be able to say the words, I love me. Could you tell us how important that is and how it applies to your life now as you move forward?
Well, it was one of the single hardest things I think I've ever had to go through. I pretended like I loved myself, and I'd written myself off because I'd listened to all the stuff that people said about me. And the hard part about loving myself was I really didn't allow other people. I mean, I would pretend to, but I really never allowed other people to get to know me because I didn't think I was good enough. I didn't think I was worthy. And so, like, we want to love ourselves, but we don't want to appear to be arrogant. But it's simply saying, I'm worth a second chance. I'm worth adopting. I'm worth giving a place to live. I'm worth marrying. I'm worth being a father. And, you know, you go through those cycles, and inside your head, if you don't believe that, you keep people at arm's distance. And so loving yourself is like, what is that? It took me a long time to figure out that it means I'm okay being me. I don't have to fake it anymore. I'm okay being me. And I talk about that encounter I had with my preacher going, well, we know you ain't perfect. We know you ain't perfect. And I was like, wow. And y'all care about me anyway? You know, but we're not fooling people. People know we're not perfect. And I need to cut myself that same bit of slack, that I need to understand that I'm going to make mistakes, and, you know, so stop self-sabotaging.
Well, Alton, thank you very much for being with us today and sharing with us. I want to thank you so much for being open and transparent. And I want to let our viewers know that Alton is available for talks, leadership conferences, YouTube conversations like the one we're having here. He is represented by Starta Leadership, and I will post their information somewhere below this video. And you can find more about Alton on altoncarter.net. Alton, I can't in good conscience though leave this video without telling everyone that when you go and buy his book, Aging Out, when you get it, if you're like me and sometimes you buy a book and it sits on your shelf and you have all good intentions of reading it, pick up chapters 48 and 49. If you're a parent, a foster parent, a child in foster care, someone who's aged out, or just someone that has a heart for kids in foster care, these two chapters, 48 and 49, need to be read by everyone. Also, at the very end, Alton includes some quirks that we can all be educated about, especially teachers and foster families. And then he also includes a I wish I would have known section that totally envelops what it means to age out of foster care. Alton, again, thank you for joining us, and I hope to get a chance to one day shake your hand in person and work together to help fostering connections in our community. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody.